I also want to thank Chairman McCall and Ranking Member Thompson for prioritizing this task force and its mission. Last Congress, this committee's task force on combating terrorist and foreign fighter travel was not only successful in producing legislative change, but also eye-opening in what it revealed. The work done by members and staff on both sides of the aisle, under Chairman Katko's leadership, raised awareness about gaps in screening and information sharing, both at home and with our foreign partners, which ultimately led to positive reforms for protecting the homeland against terrorists and foreign fighters. This, of course, includes the Visa Waiver Program Improvement and Terrorist Travel Prevention Act that enacted major VWP reforms into law in 2015. I hope that this task force on denying terrorist entry in the United States, will be as successful in its investigation and in its final recommendations. I also look forward to working with Ms. Watson-Coleman from New Jersey and all the members on both sides to ensure that it is a success. And I thank you for the time that you've spent, and I really am looking forward to this. This is a critical time for our nation's security. The previous task force rightly focused on the tens of thousands of jihadist fighters traveling from the West to join the fight on the ground in Iraq and Syria. Now, however, we see that number dropping as these fighters seek to expand their actions beyond Iraq and Syria. And while coalition forces continue to advance and squeeze ISIS territory, the threat against the West continues to rise as the fighters leave the so-called caliphate. As FBI Director Comey said this past September, through the fingers of that crush are going to come hundreds of very, very dangerous people. There will be a terrorist diaspora sometime in the next 2 to 5 years like we've never seen before. Those chilling words should serve as a wake-up call. Just last week, it was reported that 2 British nationals and a U.S. citizen were detained by Turkish border police after spending over 2 years in ISIS territory, with hundreds of American fighters and thousands of European fighters seeking to return to their home countries, armed with lawful passports, terrorist training, and jihadist connections. We must be able to prevent them from gaining entry into the United States by abusing our immigration system. ISIS has already planned, conducted, or inspired more than 180 plots against the West, including the 2015 attacks in Paris and the 2016 attacks in Brussels, Nice, and Berlin. The majority of these attackers were European citizens with valid passports, so it's easy to imagine any one of them gaining access to the country through a valid visa or through the Visa Waiver Program. And as Secretary Kelly recently said, the U.S. is the prime terrorist target, especially since so many of these fighters are citizens of VWP countries. But that is why we are here today, to ensure our defenses are strong and to protect the homeland as it continues to be targeted. While there are numerous benefits to our country that stem from our welcoming immigration system, like tourism, trade, and business, we should never cease to examine our processes through the lens of a terrorist in search of potential gaps. We must always strive to stay one step ahead. That is what we learned in the wake of September 11th, where all of the attackers entered the U.S. through legal means, mainly through lawful tourist visas. This, of course, prompted an overhaul of our immigration and transportation security systems, as well as the creation of our Department of Homeland Security. But our work is not yet done. We still have a lot to learn and a lot to adapt to. Despite the reforms undertaken in the wake of 9/11, there are still gaps and weaknesses in our system. One of the attackers who killed 14 people in San Bernardino in 2015 legally entered the country on a K-1 fiancé visa, raising questions about the level of scrutiny given to visa applications. There are also remaining gaps in vetting and screening of VWP applicants and in information sharing with other countries, which are both vital in the fight against the terrorist diaspora. I look forward to hearing from our expert witnesses on what the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State are doing to ensure that visa and VWP applicants are receiving sufficient screening and vetting before they are allowed to enter into this country. I thank the witnesses again for being here and for their service, as well as the many men and women who serve our nation, both at DHS and the State Department. And with that, the Chair now recognizing the ranking member of the task force, the gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Watson-Coleman, for any statement she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I am delighted to be here and share this very important task with you. I look forward to working with you. I am pleased to join in holding today's hearings on denying terrorist entry into the United States. I welcome the opportunity to work with you and our colleagues on the task force to examine how the federal government can continue to strengthen our nation's security and do so in a way that upholds our American values. Since the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, Congress has established the Department of Homeland Security and directed the implementation of significant and wide-ranging new programs and policies to help prevent terrorist travel to this country. For example, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has deployed visa security units to our embassies and consulates overseas, supporting the State Department in vetting visa applicants. U.S. Customs and Border Protection now utilizes the Electronic System for Travel Authorization, ESTA, to screen Visa Waiver Program travelers before they are permitted to board a plane to the U.S. These agencies now also conduct recurrent vetting of all Visa and ESTA holders to check against any new derogatory information. These are just a few examples of the security initiatives that have been implemented in the aftermath of 9/11 and on an ongoing basis as other potential vulnerabilities have been identified. Of course, more work remains to be done to ensure we continue to stay ahead of those who might seek to do us harm. That work must be done on a bipartisan basis, in the interest of all Americans, and in keeping with our principles as a nation of immigrants. Using rhetoric that divides us and alienates our foreign partners is counterproductive to the security of the United States. Banning certain groups of people from entering this country based on their faith, whether explicitly or implicitly, is unconstitutional. Playing on people's fears and prejudices for political gain is just downright un-American. As a country, we can do better, and I hope that on this task force, we will do better. America is always at its strongest when we stand together in support of our common good and our shared values. I appreciated hearing from our government witnesses yesterday in the classified setting about the good work the Departments of Homeland Security and State are doing to further enhance our security. I hope to hear from these witnesses today about what more can be done to identify and thwart attempted terrorist travel on an individualized basis and how Congress can support their efforts. I also hope to hear from our Government Accountability Office witness about what their work on these issues tells us about the path that we must go forward. I look forward to a very productive hearing today and to working alongside my colleagues on the task force and with you, Mr. Chairman, as we go forward. And again, I thank you for holding today's hearing, and I thank the witnesses for joining us, and I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall, for any statement he may have.
Thank you, Chairman Gallagher and Ranking Member Watson Coleman. In June 2000, 3 of the 9/11 hijackers flew from European cities to Newark International Airport and were admitted into the United States. Their names were Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Shehi, and Ziad Jarrah. Sadly, we know the rest of the story. In the years following the 9/11 attacks, the United States government went to great lengths to identify gaps in our vetting systems and in how our agencies share intelligence. The Department of Homeland Security was created by the Bush administration and Congress to help protect America from terrorists by connecting the dots. Now we face a new and growing threat to the homeland. In his speech on April the 18th, Secretary Kelly described us as a nation under attack, facing the highest terror threat level in years. Due to our brave servicemen and women, ISIS and al-Qaeda have incurred great losses in Syria and Iraq. Yet as territory under their control shrinks, we are seeing an exodus of foreign fighters returning to their homelands, 10,000 of which are in Europe. Our committee has taken a serious look at foreign fighters. Last Congress, we pulled together a bipartisan task force to examine the threat posed to the United States by foreign fighters, especially those traveling in and out of Europe. Through this extensive 6-month review, the task force produced more than 50 actionable recommendations to safeguard the homeland, and this committee and the House passed legislation to address those recommendations. Those which became law include the Foreign Fighter Travel Review Act, which requires the President to review all Americans who have traveled to Iraq and Syria to join a foreign terrorist organization, and the National Strategy to Combat Terrorist Travel Act, which requires the administration to develop a substantive strategy to combat the threat posed by extremists and prevent them from entering our country undetected. Significantly, the Visa Waiver Program Improvement and Terrorist Travel Prevention Act of 2015 ramped up the security of the Visa Waiver Program by improved intelligence information sharing through HSPD 6 agreements and keep terrorists from entering the United States undetected. It also includes major provisions that will make it harder for terror suspects to cross borders, including enhanced counterterrorism screening of travelers and measures to crack down on passport fraud. This new task force will pick up where the last one left off, addressing the readiness of the homeland in light of the foreign fighter exodus. I was pleased to name Congressman Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin as the chair of this initiative. As a former combat veteran and Middle East issue expert, I know he will tackle these urgent issues with seriousness and dedication. Together with the other 7 members of this bipartisan task force, I know that this will be equally productive and essential for America's security. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on the important work performed by the Department and the State Department to prevent terrorists from gaining access to our homeland. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Other members are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are honored to be joined by a very distinguished panel of witnesses. Mr. Michael Dougherty, Acting Assistant Secretary for Border, Immigration, and Trade at the Office of Policy at the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. John Wagner, Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner at U.S. Customs and Border Protection at the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Clark Settles, Assistant Director for the National Security Investigation Division at Immigration and Customs Enforcement at the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Edward Ramatowski, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Visa Services at the Department of State, and Ms. Rebecca Gambler, Director of Homeland Security and Justice Issues at the Government Accountability Office. Thank you for being here today. The witnesses' full written statements will appear in the record. The chair now recognizes Mr. Dougherty for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Just turn on your mic there. I did that 5 times in my first week here, so
Thanks.
don't worry about it.
Chairman Gallagher, Ranking Member Watson Coleman, and distinguished committee members, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today with my DHS, State Department, and GAO colleagues. The Visa Waiver Program, or the VWP, was created by Congress in 1986 to allow citizens of qualifying countries to enter the United States for business or pleasure without having to secure a visa, but only after necessary security clearances were performed. In addition to promoting and easing travel to the United States, the VWP relieved the Department of State from having to interview low-risk applicants from program countries at our consulates overseas. The VWP has evolved since that time, with Congress having legislatively modified it 5 different times. Today, the program can properly be viewed not just as a means of easing travel to the United States, but as a means to improve our security posture, modernizing screening and vetting processes, increasing information sharing within our government and with foreign partners. As the committee is aware, DHS Secretary Kelly has emphasized that blocking terrorists and serious criminals from entering the United States is a top priority of our department, and we're committed to working closely with Congress and our interagency and foreign partners to protect our homeland. Currently, 38 countries are approved to participate in the VWP, which allows their nationals to travel to the United States for up to 90 days. Travelers are required to complete an online application in advance of travel that is known as the Electronic System for Travel Authorization, or ESTA. Looking at the ESTA application, CBP conducts automated vetting to assess whether the individual is eligible to travel under the VWP or could pose a risk to the United States or to the public at large. To participate in the VWP, countries must share information on terrorists and serious criminals, timely report lost and stolen passports, have robust border and travel document security practices, and engage in effective traveler and migrant screening. Looking at the criteria for lost and stolen passports, for example, VWP countries have to report that loss or theft no later than 24 hours after they become aware of it, and VWP countries have contributed over 50 million such records to Interpol, which accounts for 70% of the Interpol holdings. Rigorous national-level assessments of program countries are conducted by the Department of Homeland Security to ensure that they meet the security standards required for continued participation in the program. The bottom line is that to join or to continue in the VWP, a country cannot represent a threat to the United States and must be working as a partner to prevent terrorist travel. The committee has contributed to the strengthening of the Visa Waiver Program through its leadership in developing the VWP Improvement in Terrorist Travel Prevention Act of 2015. I'd like to take a moment to highlight several important changes that have resulted from DHS's implementation of the Act. We've increased the sharing of terrorist and criminal identity information. Several countries have increased the frequency of their reporting of lost and stolen passports to Interpol. Several countries have agreed to adopt new technologies for vetting asylum, refugee, and other immigration applications. All VWP countries now are issuing and using for travel to the United States fraud-resistant electronic passports that meet or exceed international standards, and DHS has implemented enhanced restrictions on travel under the VWP for individuals who have traveled to certain countries of concern since March 2011 or are dual nationals of particular countries. DHS manages the ongoing statutorily required monitoring and regular assessment process to ensure that VWP countries are consistently meeting program requirements. These assessments are performed in consultation with DHS's component agencies, the State Department, and other interagency partners, as well as the intelligence community and the governments of VWP countries themselves. Be assured that the Department engages in regular monitoring of all VWP countries to identify emerging threats and vulnerabilities and to take appropriate action. As Secretary Kelly recently indicated, we have to ensure the VWP is prepared to counter the threat of foreign fighters returning from the battlefields of Syria and Iraq. Under his leadership, DHS will continue to look at ways to work with this committee to strengthen the security of the program. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today. I will look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Wagner, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Gallagher and Ranking Member Watson-Coleman and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today about U.S. Customs and Border Protection's role in securing international travel. Our agency works around the clock to adjudicate U.S.-bound travel, and we've developed mechanisms to address national security risks and other questions as far in advance of arrival on U.S. soil as possible. Now, to provide a sense of scale, last year CBP inspected over 390 million arriving international travelers, of which about 119 million flew into our airports. That's about 327,000 international air passengers each day, and that's just inbound. Visitors make up about 50% of these arrival numbers, and they generally split into two categories, visa and visa waiver. Visitors from countries that need a visa go to the U.S. Embassy overseas and work with Department of State to get a visa. My colleague from the State Department will describe that process in more detail in a few minutes. For the Visa Waiver Program travelers, CBP has developed an online application process known as the Electronic System for Travel Authority, or ESTA for short. These travelers must have an approved ESTA in order to board the plane overseas, and we've built a verification system with the airlines to support this. Now, CBP adjudicates ESTA applications against a series of law enforcement and intelligence databases. For the first half of this fiscal year, we've approved about 6.9 million ESTA applications and denied over 35,600. Of these denials, about 1,050 were due to national security concerns. Following the enactment of the VWP Improvement Act in 2015, CBP took several steps to apply the new restrictions for individuals who have traveled to the 7 countries and individuals who are dual nationals. So far this fiscal year, we've denied ESTAs to about 13,000 people due to the travel restrictions and nearly 3,000 for the dual nationality. Now, once a visa or ESTA is issued, CBP's National Targeting Center conducts continuous vetting against a host of law enforcement and intelligence databases to ensure travelers remain eligible. If any issues arise, CBP may revoke the ESTA or work directly with Department of State to have the visa revoked. For the first half of this fiscal year, over 1,800 visas have been revoked as a result of this, and over 450 of these were due to national security concerns. Now, once the travel is actually booked, CBP conducts pre-departure vetting on all international travelers coming to the U.S. By law, airlines provide CBP with advanced passenger manifest information and access to their reservation systems. CBP reviews this data along with previous crossing information, intelligence reports, and law enforcement databases to identify any potential risk factors. When risk factors are identified, we've built several mechanisms to address those questions while the traveler is still overseas. Pre-clearance operations, the Immigration Advisory Program, and our regional carrier liaison groups. Let's start with pre-clearance. We have 15 air pre-clearance locations in 6 countries. This is where uniformed CBP officers have legal authorities to complete the same immigration, customs, and agriculture inspections of travelers as at a domestic airport. This is our highest level of capability overseas. If found ineligible to travel to the United States at a pre-clearance location, CBP has the authority to deny entry on foreign soil. In fiscal year 16, CBP officers processed 18.3 million travelers for entry into the United States at our pre-clearance locations, totaling over 15% of our U.S.-bound travelers. Of this total, CBP prevented 6,400 inadmissible travelers from boarding U.S.-bound flights. Now, secondly, we have the Immigration Advisory Program and the Joint Security Program. This is where we have plainclothes CBP officers at major gateway airports in Western Europe, Mexico, Central America, Asia, and the Middle East. Using advanced information from our National Targeting Center, IAP officers work in partnership with the host governments and the airlines to address any national security risks and immigration issues. If any concerns remain after our interview of the passenger, CBP can issue a no-board recommendation to the air carrier and refer the traveler back to the U.S. Embassy for a more thorough review of their status. Last year, we recommended over 4,500 no boards to the airlines. Now, for foreign locations not covered by pre-clearance or the IAP officers, we have regional carrier liaison groups that work directly with the airlines to issue no board recommendations in cases where there's any national security concerns or any immigration questions. Now, once passengers arrive in the United States, all people are inspected by CBP officers. The experience and the intuition of each individual officer is invaluable, and this provides the final piece to the pre-arrival vetting and all the background checks. CBP officers review travel documents, review the results of the pre-arrival vetting, collect biometrics if required, and then interview all travelers to determine the purpose and their intent of travel. If there's any questions about their admissibility, their customs declaration, agriculture concerns, or any national security issues, the person is referred into secondary inspection for a more thorough examination. So we continually strive to improve our vetting and our intervention initiatives to identify and close any security vulnerabilities, and we remain closely engaged and coordinated with our government counterparts, foreign governments, and our private sector stakeholders. So thank you again for the opportunity, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Mr. Settles, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Gallagher, Ranking Member Coleman Watson, and distinguished committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the efforts of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement to enhance U.S. visa security and to prevent the travel of terrorists and other criminal actors. Visa security is an essential component of our responsibility to protect the homeland, shared by both the Department of State and the Department of Homeland Security, which includes the Offices of Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, and U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP. At HSI, we strive to uphold our Homeland Security responsibility by confronting dangerous challenges on a global stage, with particular focus on those emanating from beyond America's physical borders. I am honored to highlight our security programs that protect the United States against an ever-evolving, diverse, and global threat. HSI special agents investigate transnational crime by conducting a wide range of criminal investigations in coordination with our foreign and domestic partnering agencies, targeting the illegal movement of people, merchandise, monetary instruments into, within, and out of the United States. The agency has extremely broad authorities and jurisdiction over the investigation of crimes with a nexus to U.S. borders and ports of entry. HSI's 3 operational priorities are border security, public safety, and national security. In an effort to augment and expand visa security operations, HSI is honored to manage the Visa Security Program in partnership with CBP, the Department of State, the intelligence community, and other DHS agencies and holdings. The VSP's primary purpose is to identify terrorists, criminals, and other individuals who pose a threat or are otherwise ineligible for a visa at the earliest possible point in the visa application process, thereby pushing the U.S. borders out as far as we possibly can. Visa Security Program operations are currently conducted at 30 visa issuing posts in 25 countries. The Visa Security Program is currently scheduled to expand to 2 visa issuing posts in fiscal year 2017 and plans to expand as resources allow every year thereafter. We understand that one of our most important priorities is to detect and prevent threats before they reach our nation's borders. To achieve this objective, HSI's international operations in parallel with the Visa Security Program also deploy highly trained personnel to 66 offices in 49 countries. The HSI special agents deployed to the 30 visa issuing posts worldwide utilize available investigative resources, in-person interviews, and collaboration between U.S. agencies and foreign government counterparts in order to investigate and disrupt the travel of suspect individuals during the visa application process. Experience has shown the department that there is no technological tool available that can substitute for having highly trained and experienced investigators deployed overseas to conduct informed interviews, enhance the information we have of terrorists and other criminal networks, and share that information with our foreign partners. HSI's Visa Security Program is supported by the Pre-Adjudicated Threat Recognition and Intelligence Operation Team, Patriot. Patriot is an interagency endeavor with CBP's National Targeting System. Through Patriot system, VSP conducts automated screening of visa applicants' information against DH holdings as well as holdings of other U.S. agencies prior to the visa applicant's interview and visa adjudication. Derogatory information discovered during automated screening is manually vetted by domestic Patriot personnel in the National Capital Region, utilizing law enforcement, open source, and classified systems. Patriot analysts then provide deployed VSP personnel with the most enhanced information available well in advance of the visa applicant's in-person interview. Following this enhanced analysis of all known derogatory information, collaboration with foreign government partners, and participation in the in-person visa applicant interview, HSI deployed special agents provide a unified DHS recommendation on visa eligibility to the Department of State. In FY 2016, VSP personnel facilitated the screening and vetting of more than 2.2 million visa applicants, recommended the refusal of 85,000 visas, and submitted 1,669 watch list nominations for counterterrorism reasons. We also facilitated the legitimate trade of 442 visa applicants. Honored members, if I may, I would like to recognize this month we celebrate Police Week, a time to honor all law enforcement officers who lost their lives in the line of duty, to include a fellow HSI brother, Special Agent Jeremy Scott McGuire, who lost his life in the line of duty last year and whose name we will be honoring and adding to the National Law Enforcement Officer Memorial. I just want to say rest in peace, Scott. Thank you for your opportunity to appear before you today and for your continued support of our law enforcement mission. I would be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Settles. Mr. Ramatowski, am I saying that right? Ramatowski or Ramatowski?
That's absolutely right, Ramatowski.
Ramatowski.
Yep.
Got it. I apologize if I butchered that before.
No,
You're recognized
you
for
did it
5
right.
minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Gallagher, Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, and distinguished members of the committee. I am pleased to assure you that the Department of State takes our commitment to protect America's borders and citizens very seriously. Toward this end, we constantly analyze and update our screening and clearance procedures. Mr. Chairman, the U.S. visa system is a layered interagency effort focused first and foremost on national security. Beginning with a petition to DHS or a visa application submitted to a consular section abroad, during the interview, prior to travel, upon arrival in the United States, and while the traveler is in the United States, the Department of State works together with our national law enforcement and intelligence partners to protect our borders. The vast majority of visa applicants and all immigrant visa applicants are interviewed in person by a consular officer. Each consular officer completes an extensive training program, which has a strong emphasis on border security, fraud prevention, interagency coordination, and interviewing techniques. In addition to that, 122 assistant regional security officer investigators at 107 diplomatic posts worldwide work with consular officers to bring additional law enforcement and anti-terrorism expertise to the visa process. All visa applicants are vetted against databases which contain millions of records of individuals found ineligible for visas in the past or regarding whom potentially derogatory information exists on terrorist, criminal, or other grounds. We collect 10 fingerprint scans from nearly all visa applicants and screen them against the DHS and FBI databases of known and suspected terrorists, wanted persons, immigration law violators, and criminals. All visa applicants are screened against photos of known or suspected terrorists and prior visa applicants. When an interview raises any concerns that the applicant may be a threat to national security, or the interagency screening process shows potentially derogatory information, the consular officer suspends the visa processing and submits a request for a Washington-based interagency security advisory opinion review, which is conducted by federal law enforcement and intelligence agencies, as well as the Department of State. As my colleague noted, the Department of Homeland Security's Patriot system and the Visa Security Program provide additional protections at certain of our overseas posts. DHS Immigration and Customs Enforcement special agents assigned to 29 embassies and consulates in high-threat locations provide on-site vetting of visa applications, as well as other law enforcement support and training to consular officers. But security reviews do not stop when the visa is issued. The Department and partner agencies continuously match new threat information with our records of existing visas, and we use our authority to revoke those visas when warranted. We refuse more than 2 million visa applications each year. And since 2001, the Department has revoked more than 160,000 visas based on information that surfaced after the issuance of the visa. This includes nearly 11,000 visas prudentially revoked after information emerged post-issuance, suggesting possible links to terrorism. Notice of these revocations is shared across the interagency in near real time. Executive Order 13780 on protecting the nation from terrorist attacks by foreign nationals, signed by the President on March 6, 2017, and the Presidential Memorandum on Heightened Screening articulate the administration's commitment to rigorously and continuously upgrade and refine our screening and vetting processes to keep this country safe. These actions range from interagency efforts to harmonize screening and vetting standards across multiple immigration programs to focusing on ways to improve our ability to deport criminal aliens. Additionally, the Department recently instructed posts worldwide to develop criteria for identifying sets of visa applicant populations that warrant increased scrutiny. We have likewise heightened vetting for any visa applicant who was ever present in any ISIS-controlled territory. Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the committee, the Department of State's highest priority is the safety of our fellow citizens at home and overseas. Every visa decision is a national security decision. We appreciate the support of the Congress as we constantly work to strengthen our system. I would encourage you to visit our consular sections when you are abroad to see how we do this on a daily basis. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Remetowski. We look forward to doing just that. Ms. Gambler, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gallagher, Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, and members of the task force. I appreciate the opportunity to testify at today's hearing to discuss GAO's work reviewing DHS efforts to screen and inspect travelers seeking to come to the United States. Each year, millions of visitors legally enter the United States. Some of them enter with a non-immigrant visa, while others enter the country under the Visa Waiver Program. Under this program, nationals from 38 countries can apply for admission to the United States as temporary visitors for business or pleasure for up to 90 days without obtaining a visa. GAO has a body of work addressing DHS and other agencies' efforts to screen travelers and manage and oversee the visa process and the Visa Waiver Program. My remarks today reflect our findings and recommendations related to these programs and efforts. First, with regard to CBP's screening efforts, CBP screens travelers coming to the United States and seeks to identify potentially high-risk travelers at the earliest point in the travel life cycle. CBP also operates 3 pre-departure programs to help identify and interdict high-risk travelers before they board U.S.-bound flights. These 3 programs are pre-clearance, the Immigration Advisory and Joint Security Programs, and the Regional Carrier Liaison Groups. Pre-clearance locations operate at foreign airports and serve as U.S. ports of entry. CBP officers at these locations inspect travelers and make admissibility determinations prior to an individual boarding a plane to the United States. Under the Immigration Advisory and Joint Security Programs, CBP officers posted at foreign airports partner with air carriers and host country government officials to help prevent terrorists and other high-risk individuals from boarding U.S.-bound flights. Regional carrier liaison groups are located and operate at domestic airports and, among other things, assist air carriers with questions regarding U.S. admissibility requirements and travel documents. CBP data indicated that in fiscal year 2015, these programs identified and interdicted approximately 22,000 high-risk air travelers. However, we found that while CBP has data and statistics on these programs, the agency has not evaluated the effectiveness of these programs as a whole, including having performance measures and baselines to assess whether the programs are achieving their stated goals. We recommended that CBP develop and implement such measures and baselines to better measure the effectiveness of these pre-departure programs, and DHS concurred. Second, with regard to the Visa Security Program, we reported on efforts to expand the program and address challenges in its operations. Under this program, ICE deploys personnel to certain U.S. embassies and consulates to assist the Department of State's consular officers with security reviews of visa applications, among other things. In our 2011 report on this program, we identified various management and oversight challenges, such as limited guidance regarding interactions between ICE officials and consular officers, lack of comprehensive data for performance measures to accurately evaluate the program, and variation from post to post in the training of consular officers by ICE agents. We also found that ICE did not track information on the time ICE agents spent on non-Visa Security Program activities. We have ongoing work reviewing the Visa Security Program and visa security efforts more broadly, and we plan to report on the results of our work later this year. Third, with regard to the Visa Waiver Program, last year we reported on DHS's oversight of the program. In particular, we reported that all 38 countries had entered into 3 agreements required under the program to 1, report lost and stolen passports, 2, share identity information about known or suspected terrorists, and 3, share criminal history information. However, not all countries had shared such information. In August 2015, DHS established a new requirement for Visa Waiver Program countries to implement the latter 2 agreements. However, DHS did not establish timeframes for instituting these requirements. We recommended that DHS specify timeframes for working with participating countries to address additional program requirements, including the requirement to fully implement these agreements, and DHS concurred with our recommendation. In closing, our work on DHS's efforts to screen travelers and manage the Visa Security Program and the Visa Waiver Program has identified findings and recommendations to help strengthen management and oversight of these programs and efforts. DHS has actions planned or underway to address a number of our recommendations, and we will continue to monitor DHS's efforts. This concludes my oral statement, and I'm pleased to answer any questions members have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gambler. I guess sort of going off that, one of the last points you made, Mr. Doherty, would you agree with GAO's assessment that 1/3 of VWP countries are not currently in compliance with their obligations? And what happens when DHS discovers a country to be in non-compliance or lacking in full implementation of their obligations?
DHS in the last GAO report, had agreed with recommendations that GAO had made on the remarks made here. Our point at this point in time is that the countries that are in the Visa Waiver Program are in compliance. There are many ways that DHS can engage those program countries to get further compliance. We engage them in many ways. Our assessments are ordinarily take place by going to those countries and looking for them to make enhancements that we know that they can make. So the department is very interested in making sure that all countries are current, and that is our position right now, is that the countries within the Visa Waiver Program are compliant with both HSBD 6 and the other agreements that we expect from them.
And how often are those reviews conducted?
Ordinarily, they're every 2 years, but if we find that somebody is not quite up to speed, we can accelerate that and engage in more dialogue with them.
And is that, if you find someone's not up to speed or non-compliant, is there a formal process for addressing that, or is it more an informal, hey, this is a problem,
Well,
do something about it?
I think technically, you're right. We are engaged at various levels in different governments, from the top down over to law enforcement. So we can have a informal communication with them. We can also demarche them if we wish. So I think the process would come through DHS headquarters eventually if things were getting very serious, in that we would have to tell them we're getting to a point where we need to engage in some type of activities, such as shortening the period of time in which your nationals can come to the United States in order to get compliance from those countries.
Thank you. And Ms. Campbell, just so I understand, is it GAO's position that DHS is currently not meeting the 2-year timeline for compliance review? And if so, what are the obstacles to adhering to that timeline?
In the report that we issued last year, as well as in previous reports on the Visa Waiver Program, we did find that DHS was not consistently submitting to Congress those 2-year reports within a timely fashion. And so we have made recommendations to the department to take steps to ensure that those reports are submitted in a timely way. And based on our work following up on those recommendations, DHS is taking steps to address that recommendation, but it remains open at this point.
Thank you. Mr. Ramatowski, your written testimony states that the vast majority of visa applicants are interviewed by a consular officer. Who wouldn't be? Who would not be included in that vast majority? How does that process work?
Under the INA, there are some statutory exemptions, which include diplomats and officials, children under the age of 14, and individuals over the age of 79, and individuals renewing a visa that has expired less than 12 months previously. But even with those exceptions, if there is any kind of an indication in our screening and vetting process that that applicant might present a threat, we can and do conduct interviews.
And just when it comes to the screening and vetting process, give me a sense of your assessment of the overall workload of your consular officers who, we're asking them to do a very important job, and also what sort of training do they get in the questioning process? Is it just a checklist, or what does that look like?
Well, in terms of workload, we handle about 14 million visa cases of all types each year, refusing over 2 million and issuing about 11.5 million. And the volume varies, of course, by country, by region, and we limit our officers to 120 interviews per day. The training that they get begins when they first join the Department of State. They take the basic consular officer training course at our training center out in Arlington, and they're trained in the immigration law, interviewing techniques, and law enforcement officers from various partner agencies speak to these groups and have helped us develop our training materials. They are trained in the culture and language of the country and the region to which they're going. And once they have arrived at their embassy or consulate duty station, they continue to get in-service training. Most of our posts have a fraud prevention unit that is focused exclusively on detecting, deterring, and defeating fraud of all types, criminal activity. And the personnel in that unit work with the line officers who are conducting the interviews to ensure that the line officers are aware of any recent scams, any fraud trends, things of that sort. And as officers progress through their careers, they will get enhanced mid-level training, management training, leadership training, and so forth. So it's a comprehensive process.
Thank you, Mr. Romatowski. 120 seems like a lot. As a former military interrogator, that's we're asking them to do a lot. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Ms. Watson-Coleman, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that the gentleman from Massachusetts. Oh. What happened to the gentleman from Massachusetts? Be allowed to sit and question the witnesses as well.
Without objection.
And secondly, I'd like to yield my time at this moment to Rep. Berrigan, who has a time issue.
Ms. Berrigan, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I represent the Los Angeles port, which is how we like to call it America's port. It's one of the largest ports. And I had a chance to visit with CBP down at the port and to see what they do. The work that they do is so excellent on making sure to secure our ports. According to staffing numbers in March, CBP was almost 1,400 officers short of its staffing target, and likely thousands of officers below what your staffing model would indicate is optimal for security and facilitation at our ports of entry. While the men and women of CBP's office are doing their best under the circumstances, at some point security and facilitation suffer. Attrition is a problem and hiring is slow. Meanwhile, the president has proposed hiring 5,000 additional Border Patrol agents, but 0 new CBP officers for our nation's ports of entry. What needs to be done to address CBP's staffing needs for ports of entry?
So you're correct. We're still about 1,400 officers short. We still have not fulfilled the original 2,000 that Congress provided to us about 3 years ago now. Thankfully, our attrition is fairly low. We're at about 3.4% per year in the CBP officer ranks, about 750 to 800 officers per year. But you're correct. The hiring has been slow. We're barely keeping pace with the attrition right now. So I know we continue to go through the entire hiring process, from the written exam to the polygraph to some of the other requirements, and look at where people are failing out of the process and how do we do a better job at recruiting, and how do we get right people into this occupation, and we'll take the jobs where we need them. So we're having a pretty extensive review of that with our Office of Human Resources, and looking at ways to shorten the process and get better applicants in, and then look at, like we can do with the military and veterans that are coming out of service, and how do we make it a lot easier for them to take these occupations. As far as additional officers, we annually submit a workload staffing model report, which articulates our needs. It's all based on the workload, the data, how long it takes to perform each function that we have at the ports of entry. And you're correct, the numbers are still a couple of thousand in that, but we submit that report annually to the Hill. So in the meantime, we look at balancing those vacancies with the use of overtime and the use of technology to help us do that, so we are not vulnerable and we do close those security gaps.
Great, thank you. Mr. Romatowski, Reuters has reported that Secretary Tillerson has sent a series of internal cables, 4 in total, to consulates and embassies abroad, instructing them of new measures to increase vetting of visa applicants. In these cables, Secretary Tillerson has directed U.S. consulates and embassies to specifically identify population risk that warrant, quote, increased scrutiny, and to implement tougher screening procedures for this particular group of people. Applicants who fall into one of the tougher screening applicants who fall into one of the identifiable population groups will be subjected to a higher level of security screening. Have you worked to develop a uniform system for identifying populations who pose a security threat?
We are actually engaged in that process now with our partner agencies, some of which are represented here and others that are not, to do exactly that. The Department of State works with and tries to take a whole-of-government approach to analyzing and detecting potential threats against our country. So we are in the process of doing that. The Secretary did direct embassies and consulates to begin that process to focus on areas that and groups that might present a higher degree of risk, and to ensure that those groups get effective screening.
Are we doing something to make sure it's a uniform process, that there's like a uniform standard?
Yes, there's definitely a uniform standard foundational base to our vetting process, which I outlined in my initial comments. Every visa applicant, or most visa applicants, give electronic fingerprints. Every visa applicant is checked through our facial recognition system, through a series of sophisticated biographic name checks and so
If I could just quickly interrupt, because I have a few seconds.
Yes.
My understanding is that the instruction was for them to identify groups
Correct.
that could be a higher risk. So my question is more of like, how do you identify those populations having a uniform standard?
Well, the degree of risk is going to vary with each particular region and country, and that's why we're asking our folks in the field to meet with their other agency counterparts to identify potential groups that present a higher risk. Certain regions, certain areas certainly do present a higher risk than others. And for example, to respond back to the chairman's question regarding 120 interviews, that's a maximum. We will take all the time we need to drill down and get to the bottom of an individual case in order to assure ourselves that that applicant does not present a threat. So that's what we're trying to do, to identify and focus our resources on areas that present a greater risk.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Katko, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I ask my questions, I do want to commend you and Ms. Watson-Coleman and the others on this task force. Having led one of these last term, what you're looking into is critically important to the security of our country, and recognizing the diffusion, if you will, of ISIS from strictly in the Syria and Iraq area to now metastasizing, if you will, to other areas of the world. It's clear that they want to infiltrate the West. It's clear they want to get into the United States. And these things that you are looking into are very important to help keep our country secure. So I thank you for that. And I thank the whole panel for what you do to try and help, keep our country safe and secure. And I appreciate that very much. Mr. Wagner, I was troubled, not by anything you said, but the statistics you talked about, and that being that you're still down about 1,400 from the authorization you had. And I know you touched on it briefly, but if you could expound a little bit more on what you're finding as the reasons for the delays and what we can do to help you expedite that process.
Yes, so it's the numbers are about 1,000 from the original 2,000, and then due to some of our reimbursable agreements that we've entered into, that number's then bumped up a little bit. So it's total about 1,400 officers right now between what level we're funded from appropriations and then from the reimbursable agreements that we have. So we try to balance that, and try to balance that in places where we can absorb that understaffing using overtime and other means to be able to do that. What this also means is, sometimes we have to say no to additional requests for service. We're getting a lot of requests for service, a lot of airports, land border locations coming in asking us to be able to process more flights and more people. So we try to find creative ways really to be able to do that. Now, the process itself, we've made some progress in shortening the length of time it takes to hire people. We've done some work, what we call consolidated hiring hubs, where we move some of those administrative procedures together, working closely with the military to be able to do this. But still, when we look at the different steps in the process, and for people that apply for the job, about half of them don't even bother to show up for the written exam. And only about 38% of the people pass the written exam. And then the other steps in the process, the interview, the medical screening, the physical fitness screening. You look at the polygraph, knocks out a lot of people, and we've worked some exemptions to that, I understand.
So it's just basically the process you have set up just substantially weeds out a ton of the people?
It
Is that
does.
the biggest problem?
We've got to get more sophisticated in the recruiting and the advertising of these occupations. They're great jobs, and we want to be able to put the right people in them, of course, without also reducing our criteria for doing so, which will hurt us down the road to do that difficult job. So it's very strict. The backgrounds have to be very strict, but they're very good federal jobs, so we have to just find the right people that are willing to take them in the locations where we have those vacancies. Most of those vacancies are on the southwest border right now.
Gotcha, thank you. Mr. Settles, I'm going to switch gears for a minute. We spoke previously about the use of biometrics and the importance of biometrics going forward in the enforcement of our laws and keeping our country safe on an immigration standpoint as well. So could you talk about some of the advances that are taking place with respect to biometrics and any problems you see in gaining biometric data from various agencies in the pursuit of the Visa Waiver Program?
So I could talk about that generally. If it's okay, I'd like to make a correction to the record. In my statement, I added a 0 to a number. I actually meant to say 8,599 recommended refusals from our VSP post, not 85,000, so I just wanted to correct that for the record. What I can say is ICE HSI doesn't play as large a role. We're more of a consumer of that information. We do have a program that is underway that we're working with DOD that I would have to probably share in a more classified setting.
Understood.
And which we would love to. But I'd probably yield to my other esteemed colleagues here at State Department and CBP to talk a little bit more about the biometric side of it.
Okay, someone like to take that? I can. Mr. Ramatowski?
Yes, thank you. The Department of State shares all of the information we collect through the visa process with our interagency partners, and that includes, of course, the electronically collected fingerprints, which go into the DHS IDENT database, and it's accessible to all of our DHS partners, as well as FBI. We send the fingerprints for screening through the FBI's criminal fingerprint database, and to other agencies as well. Other biometrics include the photograph, which we get from all applicants, and that's screened against our facial recognition system, which includes, among other things, beyond 60,000 terrorist photographs that have been collected by the intelligence community. And if there's a facial recognition match, that would, of course, signal the consular officer to halt action on that case. So we continue to share all of our data and to develop our capabilities even further.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I want to thank the chairman for letting me ask questions. I have to run to another meeting, but I encourage all of you in this space to look at the advances being made in the biometric field and make sure you apply them on the front lines. And to the extent you need help from us, you got to let us know because we'll be there for you. So thank you all of you very much. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Ms. Jackson Lee for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank the chair very much. Thank the witnesses for their testimony. I'm going to pursue a line of questioning. First of all, let me say the task force is asking a very important question, and I hope that we can work on these matters in a bipartisan manner and expand to look at a number of other issues that impact the security of Americans. I do want to indicate that we have on this committee great respect for all of the personnel that are in the service of our country for its domestic security and national security. I think sometimes policies cause our very dedicated staff persons to really have to perform in a way that is inconsistent with our values of democracy and justice and fairness for all. Let me first of all say to Mr. Settles my sympathy as well to your team for the loss of your fallen agent and to his family. I want to indicate to Mr. Wagner, we have worked together for a number of years, and I thank you for your service. You remember the Muslim ban and the rush in which it came before the court orders, and everyone was scrambling, and many members of Congress were trying to help their constituents, and the awkwardness of what has been normally good relationships was evident. And so I hope that going forward, I hope we don't have that order in place, but going forward, that those dispatched in local offices can recognize that we are on their team seeking information. I had a 16-year-old Jordanian statused young man traveling on his own, being held, and his family could not see him. I couldn't see him, and he was shipped off to Chicago, and he lived in Houston, Texas. So anyhow, what I wanted to ask was the question of reports that we've received on the implementing of the rules, and when that ban was in place, that conflicting implementation guidance resulting in different ports implementing the order differently, such as taking a status Jordanian. Currently, what guidance does CBP issue to CBPOs operating at the ports of entry regarding implementation of the travel ban? What is the status of the travel ban with respect to your officers throughout the country?
Well, I believe they're subject to litigation, and we're following what the court orders. So we've put that information out to the frontline personnel to comply with all of the court's instructions.
And meaning that there's no travel ban, there's no Muslim ban. You're not operating under a Muslim ban right now.
No, we are not.
Okay. Let me further ask, and I know that we're in an open setting. I had a bill dealing with foreign fighters. What can you tell me about your procedures for individuals who come through a Visa Waiver Program, country, and may have fought gone to the Caliphate to fight and are now coming through a Visa Waiver Program, or may come through a Visa Waiver Program? What procedures are your officers using with respect to that population?
So a couple of different ways we would look at. First is the granting of the ESTA approval to even travel. They've got to fill out an online application with us, including their place of birth, all of their passport information. We run that through a series of law enforcement databases, and we also bounce that against certain data fields against the intelligence community.
And does that include preventing them from getting travel documents as well?
Correct. So that would prevent them from traveling under the Visa Waiver Program if there were any concerns identified there. Once they get that approval, then they actually book their travel. We do look at the airline reservation data. We look at what their trip consists of. We look at all the different parts and the data pieces within that reservation, as well as the airline manifest information, which is basically your passport details. We run that through a series of what we call rule sets. And we take all of that reservation data and we take intelligence reports and we translate that into rules. So we say, give me all of these passports from this country with males between these ages traveling from this country or this route. And we start with a list and then further cull it down on the basis of that and narrow that down to people we need to talk to or question about things. Or we link it against known pieces of information. So again, in conjunction with the law enforcement and intelligence community, known pieces of information that we can connect a person to more than likely would deny their travel under that program or cause them to go through additional scrutiny or inspections either overseas or when they arrive.
I get a quick question. Thank you so much to Ms. Gamler. I just want to know, you're sitting on the panel with the implementators of rules of security. What is the GAO's perception of the layered approach on the Visa Waiver Program, and do you think it's structured enough, or is there more that we need to do?
Based on our work looking at not just the Visa Waiver Program, but some of the other programs that we've talked about today, I think we've seen progress and implementation in terms of DHS's oversight of the program. One of the key areas, though, that we've talked about as it relates to some of the pre-departure programs that I mentioned in my oral statement is the need for DHS and CBP to develop metrics and baselines to really help them assess the effectiveness of some of these programs. So that is a key recommendation that we've made to DHS related to some of their screening and pre-departure efforts that we think it's important for them to implement going forward.
To the chairman and the ranking member, let me thank you for your indulgence, and to all of the witnesses, thank you for your service to the nation. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Sheriff, now Congressman Rutherford, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start off, first of all, by thanking all of you for your great service. As I've had an opportunity to travel around the country and observe some of your agents and employees in action, it's been refreshing. And so I thank you for that. You have a lot of dedicated members out there. I want to touch base with something that Mr. Settles said about you corrected the number, the 8,500 in admissions. Now GAO reports that we identified 22,000 high-risk travelers in 2015. And so these 85, were they in that 22,000, I presume?
Yes, these are the numbers for the 30 visa issuing posts we have in 25 countries that we've strategically placed.
Okay, so
order
that
to
so that
provide
only
that layered
includes the
approach.
VSU folks, right?
That is the VSU, the Visa Security Program.
right.
The units overseas, we call them the units. The program is the Visa Security
okay.
Program. And so that's for those 30 posts.
Okay, and so does that mean about half of these, or a little more than half, are being determined to be high risk, but they're being allowed to come in? Is that a correct assessment or no?
No, because the number starts at about 2.2 million for those 30 posts. And we whittle it down, and we have derogatory information on about 74,000.
Okay.
And then utilizing automated vetting, as I talked about yesterday in the classified setting, what I can say is the information is as good as what's in there. And,
Right.
I think, like I mentioned, Director Comey said you can vet until the cows come home. But if the information isn't in the system, so we amplify that information with analysts both here in the U.S., that when we have derogatory hits, then we send it to our agents over there that are, solely there to do that cop-to-cop foreign liaison partnership, and also to, increase the information so we have more in the system for the future. So that 8,500 is part of that process.
Okay.
And then from there, we go down to where we watch listed 1,669.
Okay, and I know that Mr. Wagner, the CBP is in fact following up on the GAO's recommendation about the baselines, and can you talk a little bit about where you're at on those measures? I'm curious of the 8,500 particularly, or any of them. Do we know of any that have actually been subject to the Visa Security Program and then allowed in and committed a terrorist act here, or not allowed in and committed a terrorist act in France or Germany or somewhere else?
So I don't have specific information like that. As a matter of fact, I don't know of an incident. But what I can tell you is, of the ones that we watch listed, obviously they didn't come into the country.
Right.
Whether or not, it's kind of complicated with reporting as far as whether our foreign partners would have shared that with us. But we do share what we can, obviously, back out of this whole process. That's the big
Back to the
part of us
foreign
being
partners.
there, back to our foreign partners.
Okay.
And I did provide in the classified setting a pretty good example, I think, of what happens every time we kind of go through that process yesterday.
Yep. And thank you for that as well. The Visa Security Program has been, I think, incredibly successful in providing increased information and recommendations to the consular offices regarding visa applications. Can you talk a little bit, Mr. Settles, about how the ICE attaches at embassies and consulates where they don't have VSU, how do you assist with the screening and the vetting of visa applications at those locations?
So in the 66 countries, at the 66 posts where we have, and 49 countries, our agents are there to do a lot more than just the Visa Security Program. They're there to help with transnational criminal networks, the kind of broader perspective of what Homeland Security investigations does. It's more of on a request from State Department and the Consular Affairs Officer. If they see something during their routine process in the high side
reach out.
vetting, they come over to us and ask for our help. And That's kind of the difference. We provide training and any recent trends or intel we have, but it's more on a case-by-case instead of it being like a full-time responsibility of the agent.
Okay. Well, listen, again, I thank all, my time's run out, but I really appreciate all of your service to our country. God bless. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Ms. Watson-Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank each and every one of you for what you represent and who you represent here today. And it just seems to me that collectively, we're doing a heck of a job and interacting with one another. Mr. Settles, a real quick question. Just like Mr. Wagner was asked, did he need more help on the CBP? Do you need more? Do you have greater requests than you're able to address with the things that you're doing in the foreign countries?
Yes, ma'am. With more,
We just need to
certainly
know
can
that.
do more. And we have an aggressive, we're doing as much as we can aggressively with the resources we have.
At some point, we'd like to have some information specifically about what additional things, resources, whatever, staff you need to do what you're doing. I think what you're doing is very important, as I believe every one of you are doing very important things. Last month, this Secretary Kelly stated that we needed to start looking very hard at the security of the Visa Waiver Program. And do you know what he meant by that, Mr. Doherty? And has the DHS begun a review of the WP, the VWP, and what security enhancements are being considered?
Thank you. Secretary Kelly, when he was making remarks about taking a hard look at the VWP, was basically iterating, I think, the concern that we all have, that foreign fighters may be coming out of the Levant, making their way into Europe, and those people are Europeans. They have European citizenship. So Secretary Kelly's intention, and the intention of, I think, everyone represented by DHS here, is to look at additional things that the department can do to make visa-free travel to the United States more secure than it is now.
Can you discuss what kind of additional things you are doing? What kind of enhancements, security enhancements are under consideration
I think
in
so.
this setting?
I would like to have that conversation with you offline if we could, and I think it is a dialogue. I know that the committee is very conversant on opportunities that the department can take. We have some of our own, but I think we're at a point, ma'am, where we're looking at several things, and we'd prefer to discuss that in a quieter setting.
One last question to Mr. Wagner. Since the terrorist attacks of 9/11 and in the wake of the attempted attack on Northwest Flight 253 in 2009, nation's visa and passenger vetting processes have been completely revamped and strengthened, obviously, with an individualized threat assessment for each traveler to the U.S. that includes screening against all kind of government holdings, biometrics, capture, and interview. Tell me, how can this individualized threat assessment be strengthened, and what do you need from us to support your efforts?
Yes, the underwear bomber, the Christmas Day bomber, I mean, that was the whole genesis really behind our pre-departure program. And we looked at a very close call in that situation. We looked at the opportunities we missed. You know, we had officers overseas at the airport that guy had come through. We weren't necessarily having them focused on that type of particular threat, so we adjusted that. We put the whole pre-departure process and the no board recommendation process into place with a very strong focus on, besides the immigration issues, the national security focus, and really to err on the side of caution. And if there's any concerns about an individual, we ask the airline not to fly them and refer them back to the U.S. Embassy, where across government we have more time to assess this person and look at them. And that was really the genesis of that program. As far as just, I think we look for support in, what we request in our appropriations requests as far as the capabilities at our National Targeting Center and the systems we build to continue to conduct the analysis and the vetting of this information across government against as many sources as we possibly can to make sure we're not missing any gaps and that we don't have to wait for another incident to sit down and figure out what gaps we missed or what information wasn't available at the right time to prevent that person from moving into the, say, the next step of the process. So we've been focused on it since then, and we've really built a really strong capability with that national security focus ever since that. That was a close call. Well, I think we've put it in the appropriations request, and there is money, I believe, for our National Targeting Center to support. And the Congress has been very generous and very supportive of us building out an entirely new facility in Northern Virginia. We had 2 national targeting centers. We've consolidated them into one location. Please invite any of you to come out and see the work that goes on there and the partnerships across government that we've established.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Fitzpatrick for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to echo my colleagues and thank you all for your service. I come here via the FBI, so I consider you all family, needless to say. And you got a very tough job keeping us all safe, but we thank you for doing it. I just want to explore for 1 second the hypothetical of terminating the Visa Waiver Program. Obviously, the world in 2017 is much different than it was back in 1986 when that law was implemented. And obviously, all those countries are very different as well. There are obviously a lot of bad people that live in many of those, if not all of those 38 countries, as Chairman McCall stated in his opening statement. Several of the 9/11 hijackers came in via Europe with no vetting whatsoever. Hypothetically, if that program were to terminate, would DHS even have the bandwidth and the capacity to deal with that new world if we were ever at that point where we needed to go there?
I would really defer to the Department of State.
If they terminated the program, then presumably all of those travelers would have to apply for a visa from the Department of State. So it's really our bandwidth, and certainly in Europe, the capacity to handle 18 million visa applications a year, when globally right now we are doing 14 million, just isn't there, and would take quite a bit of time and resources to ramp up to be able to handle that caseload if the entire program was suddenly eliminated.
And what would you see that looking like, I mean, numerically?
Well,
Could the embassies handle it? Or are we at the point now where it wouldn't even be possible?
It wouldn't be possible with that volume, with the current physical plant and staffing that we have. No, it wouldn't be possible. Not in any reasonable length of time.
So we've grown dependent upon the Visa Waiver Program then, essentially.
Well, resources that were used to handle visa applications when the program started in the mid-1980s have since been reallocated, both real estate and officer positions to other countries where the visa demand was greater. We didn't just keep officers in Europe with nothing to do.
Okay.
Yeah, and the volume is about 19.5 million travelers last year under the Visa Waiver Program. So, I mean, the volume's substantial, but I think if you look at comparison of the Visa versus Visa Waiver programs, you know, both programs collect similar biographical data from the individual. The vetting queries that are run in the analysis is fairly similar on the 2 programs. The big distinction is the point in time when that traveler meets with a U.S. government official. And for a traveler with a visa, they meet with a consular officer to give their fingerprints, have their photo taken, and be interviewed at the U.S. Embassy while still overseas. In the Visa Waiver Program, we allow that traveler, after that pre-screening, that their first interaction with a U.S. government official would then be a CBP officer at the port of entry, where they'd get interviewed, collect the same fingerprints, run the same queries, and also have their photo taken. So it's really whether you allow that person to get on the plane to travel here, to collect the same kind of information and go through a similar type of interview. The background checks and the biographical data that serves as the platform for the 2 are fairly similar in that. So it's also looking at it from asylum claims and some of the admissibility issues is do you allow the risk of the person getting on the plane to do the same level of information once they get here, or do you do it overseas? And I think it's probably the biggest distinction between the two.
I would also add that the information sharing that is so important to populating our watch lists about threats from these countries might be endangered also if the program were to be suddenly terminated, because a number of our partner countries use their membership in the Visa Waiver Program to justify the enhanced information sharing with the United States that benefits both sides. So that's a factor to consider as well.
Is it fair to say, though, that the Visa Waiver Program presupposes that we have confidence and faith in the security protocol of these other countries? And if so, is that warranted today?
Sir, if I could answer that, I think it's probably as strong as it's ever been. The assessments that are performed by the Department of Homeland Security are very granular. So we look at, for example, at how do you train your people? Do you have a legal system that we would recognize as putting criminals away or terrorists away? Do you have security processes that we recognize as essential to making sure that you don't have a lawless population or a group of terrorists in your midst who then could become part of the Visa Waiver Program? I haven't physically sat down and counted everything that we consider in an assessment, but there is a significant number of security features that are involved in those assessments, and they are very, very detailed.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, to your buck.
The chair recognizes Mr. Higgins for 5 minutes, and votes went off, but we should be good with 5 minutes and some words at the end. We'll
Thank you,
almost as
Mr.
if we
Chairman. I
planned it.
move fast. Deputy Commissioner Wagner, thank you for your service to the Thin Blue Line, sir. I recognize and respect the mourning band upon your badge. How long have you been behind a badge, sir?
Over 25 years, sir.
And in the 25 years, have you managed to be able to recognize a damn good cop when you see one and when you interview one?
Absolutely.
Thank you. The applicants that try to come to work for your agency, are not many of them experienced and recognized and decorated officers and deputies from other agencies?
Yes, some of them are.
Yes, sir. And what's the failure rate for the psych eval and the polygraph test for those deputies and police officers?
I don't know that we have the data by their previous occupation. I wouldn't know.
Your best guesstimate on that?
No visibility into that, sir. It's a different part of the organization. Really.
I'm getting at the 1,400 agents that you need, and that there seems to be a built-in resistance in the system. By my own experience, I've recognized as a police officer for 14 years, sometimes officers choose to advance their career, go to another department, and they can't pass a psych eval and they can't pass a polygraph. It's a rather bizarre circumstance, and tell this committee, are you running into that?
Well, there's no psychological exam for the CBP officer occupation. For the polygraph, yeah, there's a very, very high failure rate for that.
What would you say the failure rate is?
It's upwards of 60 to 70%.
Thank you. Just like the committee to recognize that this is a common circumstance across the country when experienced and highly decorated and capable police officers apply for jobs at federal agencies, they can't get hired. When the ranking officers that are interviewing them sometimes know that they're turning away a damn good cop for that job. Deputy Secretary Ramatowski, it seems to me there's a tendency in our nation and perhaps the world to give a certain pedigree to a visa. That visa comes with a certain expectation of that individual has been properly vetted and cleared and whatnot. I'd like to address that for a moment. The beginning process of applying for a visa, the person applying for that visa has to present what's referred to as proper certificates to proper government authorities, like birth certificates and marriage licenses. Is that correct?
Depending on the type of visa, yes, that's correct.
And those documents are frequently coming from, you know, we're familiar with certain levels of security measures on our own identifications here in America, watermarks, barcodes, magnetic scans, etc. But a birth certificate and a marriage license coming from a rural area in some of these nations that their citizens are seeking access to our country, given the very advanced state of the ability to forge documents, it would seem to me that that would be a very weak link in the chain, and that's where the chain begins, that these documents are presented from some rural community. I mean, I've arrested men with many excellent IDs, driver's licenses, American driver's licenses that would pass muster, that any cop would look at and say, that's a real driver's license, and the whole thing is fake. The ID is fake, the whole thing's fake. The only thing real on it is his picture. And if that can happen with an American driver's license, what are they doing with marriage licenses and birth certificates in this vetting procedure?
You're quite right, sir, and that's why we never depend exclusively on the documents for granting an immigration benefit, because in many countries they could be and are fraudulent. We have fraud prevention offices at all of our large and medium-sized embassies, and even at the smaller ones, an officer is always designated as the fraud prevention officer. And they are focused on reviewing and investigating any suspicious documents. Our officers have a network of contacts throughout the country with civil registrars, government passport offices, courthouses, and so forth to verify documents when necessary. And also, the value of the consular interview is ascertaining whether the applicant matches the documents that he or she is presenting. Does the story make sense? If a marriage is claimed, but the two parties don't know anything about each other, then there's maybe a problem there.
Thank you for your answer, sir. In the interest of time, Mr. Chairman, I have further questions. I'll submit in writing, and I yield back.
Thank you. We now have to go vote, as one does in Congress from time to time. I want to thank the witnesses for their time and for their testimony, both yesterday and today. This was a great way to start the work of the task force with serious, thoughtful conversation. I want to thank the members of the task force on both sides of the aisle for being here, for being thoughtful. I'm very excited about where this is headed. We have an incredible range of experiences, local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, military, diverse backgrounds, and my hope is that we're able to harness the outside expertise that you bring, and come up with some recommendations that are serious, that are smart, and ultimately will make the homeland more secure. And for waking up every day in pursuit of that noble objective, and I can't think of an objective more noble than that, I want to thank each and every one of you. So with that, pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, the task force stands adjourned.